Hello and welcome to Talking Home Renovations with the House Maven. I am your host, Catherine McPhail. I am an architect. I practice in Eastern Massachusetts, and my specialty is additions and renovations to existing homes. So this podcast is meant to take some of the stress out of home renovations so homeowners can learn as much as they can about the whole process before they get started. I also have a number of renovation stories from around the U.S. Today's episode is a renovation story with a slight twist in that I am interviewing a builder architect who was involved with the story, and he's not the homeowner, but it's a story of a mid-19th century Italianate historic house in historic Charleston, South Carolina that needed to be lifted 8.5 feet to get out of the flood zone. So this is a fascinating story to me. The audio isn't great in some parts, and I apologize for that, but I feel like it's a compelling story that I wanted you to hear. I have been wondering what is going to happen to various communities in Massachusetts that I have known and loved and are in the floodplain. So anyway, it was interesting for me to hear what the process was for this very massive, impressive house. And I hope that you like it too. The guest today, his name is Buzz Morris, and he's Morris Construction's principal and licensed builder and architect, and he's been building homes since 1992. Featured in the periodical Carolina Compass, Buzz is referred to as, quote, moving at a New York pace with a Southern attitude. He shows a determination to be closely attached to what is traditional and honest and life-giving, unquote. So here's my conversation with Buzz.
Well, I guess we're going to talk about One Water. We've raised a few houses, but One Water is it's an historic home. It was built in 1855 or 1854. Took about 12 years to build it. It's a sister home. There's one next door just like it. Beautiful Italianate design. And it was built on the ground, like most of the houses in Charleston were. And I don't remember exactly when all the hurricanes started. It was about 6 years or so ago. We had 4 floods in 3 years. 3 of the 4 floods were hurricanes, some more severe than others. And one was a rain that flooded downtown, which we get that a lot, but this particular rain was worse than usual. So the homeowner, very nice man, he's from DC, he's a doctor, bought the house maybe 5 or 6 years ago with his wife, and they moved down here. And he just walked in I think it was after Irma, a few months afterwards. He had gotten our name from other neighbors and seen our trucks around and seen some of the other houses we'd raised. And he's a nice fella. He just walks in the office, asked me how much it would cost to raise his house. I said, well, I don't know. Let me see. And so of course I went on Google and saw that it was a major structure. I mean, it's most of the houses downtown are wood, heart of pine wood structures. This particular one, I'd say maybe 30% of the homes are brick structures. You can kind of see brick behind me if you have video of this historic brick. So, a house has been sitting there for 165, 170 years. It's not built to code by any means, and it's it could be a rickety structure. So there's some nervous thoughts about doing it, whether or not it would work. So long story short, it took us a little over a year, maybe a year and a half to get the process done.
All right. So when this guy walked into your office, because you're an architect and a builder, so you're both. You're a design build firm led by an architect.
Yes, I'm a licensed architect and a builder, licensed builder. I used to do a lot more design work than I do today. I'm focusing on construction mostly these days. I've got a good relationship with plenty of architects in town. So this project, I did not do any design work. It was the lift was designed by an architect in town.
Okay.
I was on we were responsible for one of the first lifts in Charleston. The Board of Architecture Review here, which is, I believe, the first one in the country, had strict rules about raising houses, and ultimately the rule was they don't allow it.
They don't allow it in the town or
in
the
the
city.
historic district. Yeah, they've got 5 different categories of structure. This particular one that I lifted on Water Street was a Category 2 structure, which means it has significant value, historic value.
So in Charleston, in the historic district, is that in the flood zone? The whole historic district?
No, not at all. Not the whole thing. The original peninsula of Charleston, back when they founded it, was built on high land. So the office I'm sitting in right now on Broad Street, which is one of the major streets downtown, does not flood. Our biggest hurricane we've had in my lifetime was Hugo, and it didn't reach this area. So there are a lot of structures in Charleston that do not flood, period.
Okay, so but then the Historic District Commission doesn't let them, or doesn't allow historic structures to be raised up? As opposed to raised, like R-A-Z-E-D, but R-A-I-S-E-D. Is there a different word?
Yeah,
lifted. We call it lifted. Okay.
So, well, right. Again, there's 5 categories. A Category 1 structure would not be allowed. A Category 2 would not be allowed. A 3 would be questionable. 4, you can almost do anything with. A Category 4, that'd be a newer structure, has no real historic value. Category 5 is, they don't even consider the BAR.
Okay, so that's kind of interesting. So how many Category 1 or 2 or 3 buildings are there that are in the flood zone? Roughly.
Category 1s would be a structure that is nationally recognized. It's a very, very important structure. So our post office, some of these other structures like the Calhoun Mansion, for example, that's obviously an important structure. What?
The old exchange.
Oh, the old exchange building. That's a hugely important structure. Those aren't in the flood zone because those were built back in the 1600s, on high land. As far as I know, there aren't any real, they'll flood, some of them will flood underneath. Mm-hmm. So that's important that they're already built kind of raised.
Okay.
But,
so this man who came to you with his Italianate house, this big
Tiny,
Italianate house, that must have been a more recent house because it was built in the lower infill part?
Yes, that's it. Right. So what happened in Charleston and, Boston, all these other old cities is they filled in the land around the main peninsula where all the marsh was. This was built in the marsh, ultimately. It's built, believe it or not, on a wooden raft. There's about 5 different there's about 5 different ways that they would build a brick structure. The engineer thinks that this structure was about 1.2 million pounds. So you can imagine how heavy it was.
Wow.
It's an 18-inch brick wall, 3-4 wides wide, very heavy. So what they did back then is this particular structure is they built a raft underneath it, and it's literally a raft. They took cypress wood, logs, and hewn them so they were round, and then they put them in perpendicular to one another, about 5 feet deep. So, and what it did was it sunk down into the pluff mud. It's basically floating on pluff mud, believe it or not.
Wow.
You know what pluff mud is?
No. Is it mud?
Pluff mud is just a black mud down here. It's if you step in it, you'll sink to your knee.
Wow. We have kind of like peat up here. We have peat like that.
Yeah, probably similar to that.
Yeah.
So this particular raft was about 5 feet deep, these round logs, perpendicular to one another. And then on top of that, they put a 2x10 or 2x12 or 2x14 inch cypress deck on top of that. Does that make sense? It sits on top of that. So if you can imagine the footprint, it's roughly 40 feet wide by 60 feet long. So the first raft would be, vertical to that structure or to that footprint. The second raft on top of that will be perpendicular. and then goes vertical perpendicular until it quits sinking. Does that make sense? Isn't
No,
that
it makes
crazy?
zero sense to me, but that's very fascinating. So,
Yeah.
wow, okay. So it's not even, they're not connected. They're just like the weight of the building is holding it all in place. So then that must have been really hard to lift up. So I'm really curious to know how that happened.
Okay. Anyway, so then the masons would start, there's no real foundation. The mason would start with the walls, this main structure around the perimeter and inside. They would start on the raft and it would start sinking and continue to sink until it quit. So I want to say the brick was probably 4 or 5 feet deep. In other words, the raft sunk down about 4 or 5 feet deep, and the brick is up, if you can imagine, 4 or 5 feet deep before they even start the first floor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there's no
Or
basement.
make a crawl space.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
then in the crawl space, is it always water
Yeah, there's a lot of it. Not always.
underneath the,
Yeah, so
wow.
that's one of the problems we had to deal with. The water table was right near surface. It's maybe 1.5 to 2 feet below surface. So they had built up over time. There's actually somebody had poured a concrete slab under the house to try to help mitigate the water problems. So we had to remove that. So anyway, they built the structure. So what we had to do is, this is how the architecture side of me helped on this particular project, because I helped the engineer design a temporary support system that goes under this structure. This 5x5 by 18-inch thick slabs of concrete, full of rebar. Each of those pads had 5 helical piers that went down to the marl. Helical pier is a pier. It's a steel tube basically that they twist into the ground until they hit hard, marl. And around the perimeter of that is a concrete skin, if that makes sense. They pour gitcrete around it as it goes down, and it creates basically a post. So if you can imagine, that was a lot of work to do underneath the house with, that's 4 feet over your head. I mean, they've got a 4-foot crawl space. They're twisting that in. It's a heck of a job. And we're dealing with water the whole time.
Yeah.
Continually sumping out water. So we go to the job site to be full of water, and we have to sump it out before we could start. So that, I did not foresee that those 15 footings being put in. So that obviously cost a little more than we expected the project to cost. It took us probably 8 months to get all that work done.
Wow. To get all of those footings in?
Yeah. There are times when it's raining or we couldn't work. We go weeks with them when we couldn't work for various reasons. But yeah, it took about 8 months to get that in and get started on the actual lift. But, another problem down here is there's no site. I mean, we had a driveway on the right-hand side and a minor little courtyard in the back. So the logistics of getting equipment in and out and working was tough.
Yeah. So this sounds like a pretty overwhelming project already. So then
Yes.
What happened once you got the footings in?
Yes. Once we poured the footings, we put 1.5 inch steel plate on top of each one. And then I called actually a remarkable company. It's called Wolf, and they're from Philadelphia. And I wasn't going to let any old house mover do this job. They worked on another house with me, and I was very impressed with this company. Very professional. They know what they're doing. If you go on their website, they've done some incredible lifts. They've done some amazing things that you couldn't imagine could be done. Moving structures and lifting them. So I wanted the best, and I felt like that we got the best. So they came in, they put in, so if you can imagine, if you're looking at the front of the house, we put in 15 of these temporary support systems or slabs, one down the center, longitudinally down the center, one row of 5, on the right, another row of 5, and on the left, another row of 5. And all that was designed and figured out beforehand and coordinated with Wolf and the structural engineer. We had many engineers. We had the structural, we had a soils engineer, we had an engineer that handled the designing the slabs, all that stuff. So a lot going on in that 8 months. So anyway, Wolf came in, they put in 16-inch thick steel main supports down those 3 longitudinal lines, directly over the slabs. And they put in, I want to say 32, what I call tertiary or secondary 12-inch I-beams. every 3 feet. So if you can imagine what's holding this structure is every 3 feet, those 12-inch I-beams are supporting the brick. Does that make sense on either side?
Yes.
Can you
I
that?
can imagine that, and I
Yeah,
can imagine it. I don't
right.
believe it.
Well, I got photographs I can send you
I mean, I
later.
believe you. I'm not saying I don't believe
Yeah,
you, but I mean, it's just hard to believe that you're doing this
no,
project.
total.
Okay. And then
Yeah,
obviously the house must have flooded pretty frequently.
yes, it did. It flooded. It flooded in 3 of those 4 floods. So in 3 years, it flooded 3 times.
Mm.
So you can imagine. I mean, you're talking about Charleston's the historic district's it's a very high end district. A lot of big money down here. The house is worth a lot of money. Costs a lot of money to raise it, but it's worth it because we're not only preserving the historic structure that's important to our town, but we're saving the value of the homes. I mean, it's worth every nickel in my book.
Right. Right. So back to the
Yes.
story. So then you had
Yeah.
all these I-beams underneath.
Yes. So that structure is underneath. Everything's secure at that point. And what we do is, believe it or not, we have 15 times 2, 30 toe jacks that go in, and each toe jack has a hydraulic line that goes to a machine that basically jacks the hydraulic jacks. It's a pump and it jacks it.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of interesting. What they have to do is at each point, all 15 points, a man's under the house and another man, and I had Yaman Wolf, he's the owner. I had him come and do the work. I'm like, I'm going to have you lift this thing. This is an important thing for us. So he actually came and ran the physical lifting part of the project. What he would do is he would turn the machine on, and the pump's running, and he would supply the hydraulic pressure to the 2 pumps at, say, the front right corner, and the man underneath would visually inspect it until it started to lift, if you can imagine. So he would see movement, and he would tell him to shut it down. And let's say that front right corner is very heavy, because it's where, you can imagine the 2 walls coming in, it's a heavy corner. Maybe there's 5,500 pounds per square inch pressure needed for that corner. And then they move to the one behind it, and one behind it, and one behind it. And in the back, it's a wood structure, so it's not as heavy. So the guy, he's under there inspecting. Maybe it takes 1,200 pounds per square foot to raise that. So each one has its own pressure point to raise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's pretty complicated.
It is, and they lock down every one. So all 30 jacks are running their exact pressure that they designate. Next day they come out and he hits the main switch and they go up 8 inches. Just like right in front of your eyes. Now, the initial lift, where they call the break, the break point or the strike line, it forms its own strike line. So it breaks where it wants to, which is typically in line, where the steel, the steel's all installed, on the same plane. So it breaks generally along that line, if that makes sense. So once they get it up 3 feet, it takes them a good day and a half to get up to 3 feet, because the men have to scurry underneath and this and that, and they're using those toe jacks. Once they get over 3 feet, now that it's high enough, they can get going a lot quicker. So the rest of the lift only took about another day and a half. We lifted the structure 8.5 feet in the air. Typically what happens with a brick structure is there's no way. So a wood structure, what you do is you would raise it up a foot, maybe 2 feet higher than it's going to stay. So if you wanted the house to be 8 feet higher than its original level, we'd raise it 10 feet. That gives us room to work underneath, get the new footings in, new piers, all that stuff. And then you come back and you drop the house back on that pier, or on the footings and the piers, and that's an easy process. The wood structure, with a brick, you can't do that for obvious reasons, because the brick, like I mentioned, the strike line, it's very rough. 160, 170-year-old brick. Some of the brick are breaking, some of the mortar's breaking. It's a rough process. So
yeah,
what we ultimately came up with was to shotcrete. We put in the grade beams, we built up the walls, and we shotcreted the structure underneath to the brick. So if you can imagine, we sprayed in the concrete to kind of marry the structure underneath to the historic fabric, if that makes sense.
Well, and you had to raise it 8 feet into the air.
8.5, yeah.
8.5. And then,
Yeah.
but its neighbors were not raised. So how does that?
No, this is interesting. Next door, the sister house, I mentioned there's a sister house. On the right is 3 Water Street. A friend of mine owns that, and he got flooded as many times as well. So he called me and asked me it's kind of interesting little study, and we're going to do a little write up on it. But on the left, we're raising the house above floodplain. On the right, we're putting in a flood wall. So we're gonna yeah, during a hurricane, or if a hurricane's coming, he's going to install a wall. It's built in Italy. It's a technology they came up with in Venice for obvious reasons. And we put in a grade beam there with sheet piles underneath, and then embedded down in the wall in that grade beam are these pieces that you pop up, and there's a female piece, and you drop the steel post down into that, and then you put in the little. You've probably seen them. I bet they have them up there in front of windows and things in flood zones, especially for commercial
No,
projects.
I haven't seen those.
Well, it's an aluminum. It's like a 2x8 aluminum board almost. That's 5 or 6 feet long, and they slide down in between each post, and they have gaskets, and it's waterproof, and it holds the water back.
Wow.
So, yeah, they're doing that in Venice. So anyway, this is a much cheaper method than raising it, but it could be a faulty method in terms of, will it work? Will the water go over it? That kind of thing. So kind of an interesting little side note.
Yeah. Well, where does it, maybe I'm not picturing it correctly, but where does the water end? So where does the wall end? Because if the water, is it around the whole house, or does it?
Well, these are brick structures with stucco on them. I didn't mention that, but they have stucco on them. So the owner, if you can imagine, again, this is a dense neighborhood. So down his east side is an old historic wall, a brick wall. On the south side is another wall. Then from that south side, which is the back of his house, to his house, we built a wall. If you can imagine this structure. So we're relying on the east wall and the south wall, or the rear wall, the historic wall, to hold the water back. Is it going to do it? I don't know, but we'll find out.
Water's a hard thing to fight. Yeah.
I'm skeptical about it. I mean, I'm not sure it's going to work. I kind of imagine the old English wooden ships where they're constantly pumping water out because the water's pouring into these old ships. I imagine the same thing will happen to him. He'll have to pump out as he goes. He'll hold back flood. His theory is, and he's correct because he's lived there for a long time, is that the water comes in and pretty quickly it moves back out. These hurricanes.
Yeah.
You get this flood, this tidal flood. It'll come up the street. It'll be 2 feet in the street. It'll come into the houses, and then it goes back out pretty quick. Typically, it's a 6-hour flood, something like that. So he thinks he can fight it with this wall.
So how do they? So you move the whole house up, and then they must cover the. I mean, I know that FEMA has rules about what you're allowed to have underneath in the flood zone.
Yes.
So what does it look like now? I'm hoping you could send me some photos, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. Well, underneath it now we have a pervious concrete deck or slab. So you can pour water into it. It goes right through. Then under that's gravel. There's a ton of gravel, and we had to put on the site just to be able to run machinery in there because that pluff mud doesn't react very well to treads and tires.
No, I can imagine it doesn't.
Yeah, it's a mess. And then you've got the front of the house is really pretty. The architect did a great job designing. There's a central entry onto a landing, and then there's stairs that go up to the right and to the left. One stair to the right goes to the piazza, the one to the left goes to the main door. So it's a very attractive design. It's really the type of thing you'd see up there in Boston, and like those brownstones, that type of entry.
Yeah.
So it really looks good. She did a great job. And then on the piazza side, which is the porch on the west side of the house, we just have piers going down, and we have a shading material under that. And then on the back and the east side is just a wall. Do
you think everybody around your area is going to start doing the same thing?
Yeah, I think there's probably, it's slowing down right now. We haven't had a hurricane in a couple of years. I mean, last year we had some threats, but we haven't really had any flooding or hurricanes, so things have slowed down. But I want to say, I know last year there was about 50 or so permits in Charleston for raising houses. I'll bet you most of those have been raised. Again, nothing to this level of work, no Category 2 structures. A lot of them are Category 3 or 4. What's called a Charleston single home, which is a little wooden home. Those are going up all over the place.
Yeah.
These bigger structures aren't going up.
So when is it really worth it to do that? I mean, I guess having a flood every year, of course,
Yeah.
seems obvious, but...
Right. Again, we had that event where we had 4 floods in 3 years. That'll mess with a homeowner. I mean, I've seen the bad psychologically to have water in your house, and it makes people do it. And it makes sense down here because the property values are so high.
Yeah.
So 20% of the value of the property on raising it, you'll get it back.
So you think in areas, low-lying areas that aren't as wealthy, what do you think is going to happen to those? They're just going to get flooded every couple of years until people move?
Yeah. Yep, that's it. It costs too much money.
Do you mind if I ask you how much roughly be like? It seems like that's just going to be a lot of money, what you described to me.
Yeah. Well, this particular house was very costly. There's a wooden structure I did on Council Street. It was the first one raised in Charleston. That particular one, I want to say, was about 20% of the value of the home. So it was about $400,000, something like that. 4 to 5. So you can imagine how expensive this other one was.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I don't even want to imagine, but I'm sure it's a very beautiful house. So maybe,
it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
But again, it's just economy of scale.
Yeah.
The house is worth X amount of money. It's worth X amount of money to raise it. It's a tedious thing. It's not just any old homeowner wants to do it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I do wonder what's going to happen with all of the all of the coastal homes up here in New England, and of course along the whole coast. Well, there are lots of them, and the whole, as I was saying before, the whole area in Nantucket, all of that needs to be raised. And what's that all going to end up looking like? I mean, obviously, it changes everything. I don't know. Just the whole thought is overwhelming, actually, about what's life going to be like living in those areas if they flood that often, and a little bit much.
Here's a little microcosm of that, in Charleston. Originally, like I said, there was a lot of resistance to raising homes, and then it became politically evident that it's going to happen. The homeowners were upset. The whole town expected it to happen, so that the mayor and everybody got behind it. And I was actually one of the guys tasked with figuring out, how are we going to do this? What's the design? What are some of the design criteria that the BAR is going to allow? They didn't want these homes to look like beach houses, on stilts. Yeah. They wanted to make sure they still had that architectural integrity that it had before. You understand as an architect. So there was a good year or so that all that stuff was up in the air. How are we going to do it? How are we going to allow it to happen? Where are we going to allow it to happen? What are we going to, what's the design criteria behind it now? So now you can go get it approved almost like it's nothing. So,
well, that's great. So that's great to have that planning in place. So
absolutely, it's all in place.
Everybody knows what to expect.
Right. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that's amazing.
You go on my website, you can see the video of it, actually, a time-lapse video.
Very cool.
We raised that week we raised it. It's really pretty neat. And now that it's done, we're going to edit the thing and show the finished product on the video. But right now it's the early video, but you can see it.
Well, that's awesome. It seems like you're going to be busy for a while, even if you did nothing else besides raising houses.
Yeah, you'd think so. But like I said, it's slowing down right now, but another hurricane might get a few more phone calls. So I hate to say it. That's
right. Well, thank you for sharing your story. It's really
absolutely
scary and fascinating and everything.
I know. Yeah, it's unfortunate it has to happen, but we're winning awards with this project, by the way.
I bet.
Historic Charleston has given us awards. Preservation Society has. The state Historic Foundation's given us some awards. I mean, really breaking ground down here with that house.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Well, good. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck down there.
Okay.
I hope there's not too much flooding or just enough or whatever, however you want to look at that.
Well, it is what it is, right?
Right. Thanks again to Buzz for sharing that story, and thank you for listening. There are links to all sorts of things we discussed in this episode in the show notes. In the episode enhancements, you'll find some photos and other information. You don't want to miss that. You could sign up to get it delivered directly to your inbox if you sign up for my newsletter, and a link to that is in the show notes. If you have any ideas for episodes or you want to be a guest, please email me at thehousemaven@talkinghomerenovations.com. Any other feedback you have is always greatly appreciated, and I do love hearing from you, so thank you to everybody who has written, and also thank you so much to everybody who's written a review and left a rating, which you could do wherever you get your podcasts, and that really helps my show be found, I guess. So anyway, I really do appreciate that support. On Facebook, you could get in touch with me there, Talking Home Renovations. Also on Instagram, Talking Home Renovations. TikTok, I am the House Maven. Twitter, I am Talking Home Reno. And Clubhouse, I don't know, are you all on Clubhouse? I have a room now of, well, not really of my own because I'm co-moderating on Monday nights starting August 23rd, 6 p.m. Eastern in the House Club with Mona Ying Reeves of Kickstart House. She and I will be co-moderating a room about, a half-hour room about home renovations, and it's going to have a varying subject matter. But join us there. It'll be fun to talk. I also have a couple other classes coming up, what to expect during your home renovation. Also, August 23rd is going to be a busy night. That's going to be 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And I also have a mastermind group for homeowners starting August 31st. And the idea behind that is that if you're going through this, it's kind of like you have this group of cohorts going through it at the same time. So you can, you can talk about your problems there and ask questions, and I'll be there helping people. Anyway, if you're interested in either the class or the mastermind, again, email me. And also, if you're in Massachusetts and you have design questions that, like, maybe you want a second set of eyes on, you can get me to, you can sign up for an hour of Ask an Architect design helpline. So anyway, check out my architecture website, which is in the show notes for more information on that. If you leave a rating and review and subscribe, that would be so awesome. And send this episode to a friend if you think they would get something out of it. Talking Home Renovations with the House Maven is now a part of Gable Media, which is the most engaged AEC multimedia network on the planet. So check out the podcasts and the video channels that are a part of that network at gablemedia.com. So that's GABLMEDIA.com. Well, thanks for listening, and until next time, take care.